Welcome to Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. We have several educators here in the museum with us, and they are behind the scenes helping to make this webinar possible. So we have Ford, Ashley, and Eric, and they help to monitor our chat and Q&A, and they help to answer any questions that you might have as we go along. Ashley, she's prepared some education resources for you to download after this program, so please do take a look at those. And you can add questions to the Q&A, and you can add comments to the chat during our program. One thing is when we do our webinars, we have visitors that come from all over the world. So please welcome, please add wherever you're coming from, whether you're coming from a different state or a different country. We love to know where you're coming from. And as always, please do remember to be thoughtful and kind with their comments on the chat. All right. So we're going to bid aloha to Eric, Ford, and Ashley and get started. All right, this picture this morning was taken on the beach in Waikiki. We've just started to welcome visitors back to Hawaii. So for the next hour, please try to imagine that you're here in Hawaii with us. We know that everyone has been spending a lot more time in front of the computer for either work or school or keeping connected with friends and family. And we're very grateful that you have chosen to spend some time with us today. So thank you. So it's a little overcast this morning as we find our way to Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. Our museum is located on Ford Island in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Our museum is not open yet, but we hope to be able to see you in person in the near future. As I turn around, I face our control tower. You can see it is a cloudy day here. You might be able to see the USS Missouri battleship in the bottom right corner of this picture. Let's keep walking. This is the runway down the center of Ford Island. Our mission is to steward America's first aviation battlefield of World War II by sharing artifacts, personal stories, impact and response to the attack on Pearl Harbor that happened on December 7th, 1941, and to the battles that followed in the Pacific region. Let's keep walking to Hangar 79. Our mission is also to honor those who have defended our freedom so we might educate and inspire future generations. All right, we've arrived at Hangar 79. Here you can still see battle damage from the attack on Pearl Harbor. You can see it on the windows, and you can also see strafing marks on the ground from enemy air fire. Let's go inside for our hangar talk. Today we honor the service of Aviator Colonel Jill Long by listening to her share her personal stories in a hangar talk. When I first heard this term, I didn't know what it meant, so I Googled it and there was no answer. I went to the source and asked a pilot who shared with me that pilots are either flying or waiting in the hangar to fly. So Hangar Talk is where aviators share stories of their flight, but they also share information about what is working or not working with them on their mission. So as this one pilot told me, it's like hip pocket training. So we are about to hear from Aviator Colonel Jill Raggz Long, and she is currently the Air Attaché at the US Embassy in Germany. So she's coming to us all the way from Berlin, Germany. We really thank her for being here. It's 9 o'clock in the evening in Germany. So Colonel Long, she has held numerous leadership positions before becoming the Attaché. She has been Chief of Strategy and Deputy Director of Strategy Plans and Programs and Analysis for the US Air Force in Europe and Africa. She was the Executive Officer of NATO-led International Security Assistance Force. She's been commander of Air Operations Squadron, a deputy group commander of Expeditionary Air Operations Group, a director of operations for air support operations. And before all of that, all of those leadership positions, she flew for 15 years in the US Air Force in the KC-135 aerial refueling tanker and the A-10 Thunderbolt attack aircraft. Jill Raggz Long also owns the company Raggz and is an aerobatic pilot. And throughout all of the years of her career, she has continued to participate and give back to the community in events such as air shows, space camps, the EAA Young Eagles program, with an effort to inspire others to pursue flying and to follow their dreams. I'm so excited to welcome Colonel Long, so let's get started.
Thanks, Monica. I appreciate you you setting this up, and I also appreciate feeling like I'm in beautiful Hawaii, cloudy skies or not, because Berlin sadly was rainy today.
So I had a little bit of rain, but here when we have rain, we get rainbows. So maybe that's a difference we have from Berlin.
Yeah, we just get sooty sky, wet sidewalks.
So imagine you're here with us today at a hangar in Hawaii. So
Perfect.
we wanted to know, first of all, we saw that you had started flying when you were 16. So that's very early and a young age. And so what inspired you to fly, and when did you realize that you loved airplanes and wanted to do this?
Well, the first time I thought about flying, and if the audio becomes bad or something, just raise your hand and I'll try and make it better. Berlin is not known for their internet connections, so I apologize up front to everyone. The first time I thought about flying was actually at an air show. I think I was 6 or 7 years old. My mom had taken us to an air show and we saw the Thunderbirds flying. And I remember getting so excited when I saw the airplane go, just soaring by and the loud noise and everything shaking. And I lost complete control. And I was like, Mom, that's going to be me someday. And she looked at me and of course, typical mom speak. She's like, oh, that's nice, dear. And there was this, in my world, like a 7-foot tall, huge guy standing behind us. And he had his arms crossed and he looked down at both of us and went, women don't do that. And my mom went ballistic. She's like, don't you dare tell my daughter what she can and cannot. And another thing. And all I could think of the entire time is, dude, you are so grounded. Because in my 7-year-old mind, when mom went that ballistic, that meant I was getting grounded. But that stuck with me the entire time. Every time I saw an airplane, I kept thinking, someday. And finally, when I was 15 years old, I decided that that's what I was going to go do. I told her, and she's like, well, when you get the money, go ahead. And that was pretty much it. That was all the permission I needed.
Mm-hmm. So what did you do then? How did you actually get to take flying lessons?
Well, first of all, if you know anything about the aviation world, don't call an airline and ask them how to become a pilot, because they'll just scoff at you, which is pretty much what they did. My first call, I think, was to like Delta or United saying, hey, I want to be a pilot. And they just laughed at me. They're like, is this a joke?
It seems smart to go to the source.
I thought so, but apparently fixed-based operations is what you would look up in the phone book or on Google nowadays. But I ended up literally just finding an airport out of the phone book and rode my bike there one day. I remember the hangar. It was like a small version of the hangar you showed, the one that we're in right now, virtually in. It had a big round top though, and the windows were all dusty. A big barrels, those big 55-gallon drums were everywhere with stuff stacked in them. You'd see hoses and parts of parts all in these barrels. And I remember walking in and there's not a soul in sight. And in the back of this hangar are airplanes that are flipped up on their nose without the prop. There were 2 of them, just kind of the tail up in the corner, the wings out, complete airplanes except for the engine, just flipped in the corner. And I remember thinking to myself, this is perfect. This place is so cool. It has extra airplanes. But I was standing there when one of the airplanes that had been out flying came up. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm in this person's hangar. I shouldn't be here. I didn't ask permission. This is probably not going to go well. And I'm making a run for my bike because I didn't drive yet. I had biked out there and I was like, okay, I'm going to go for my bike. But then I realized the person who got out of the plane was between me and my bike. And I was like, oh no, what do I do? And I just stood there and froze. And he came walking out of the plane, all this very serious looking face and angry look on his face, like, what the heck are you doing here? And I just started shaking. And as he approached me, he's like, what do you want? And I did the coolest pilot thing ever and burst into tears and started just talking, because if you haven't told in the last 2.5 minutes that I'm an extrovert, so everything came out. It was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't touch anything. I promise I didn't. Well, okay, maybe I touched a few things, but I promise I didn't break anything. And you have so many airplanes here and I just want to learn to fly. And that's all I'm here for. I promise I won't break anything else. Just please let me fly. Just that's all I want to do. I want to learn to fly. And I need to be quiet. And he just stood there and looked at me and kind of looked back at the airplane he had just gotten out of and looked at me again, looked back at the airplane, said, get in. And that was it. I got in the airplane, we went for our first flight, and I could tell you all about that amazing adventure, but and that was, I knew, I just knew right then and there that that's what I needed to do.
That's incredible. Now, so you were 16 and then you headed off to college after that. I think you went to University of Portland. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a question from someone that asked it, while you were at college, you're so busy studying and you have so many things with, you're busy with academics, and how did you find time to continue to pursue your interest in flying?
The simple answer is you don't really find time. You make time. Think about all the things that you want to do in life, or all the things you do in life. It comes down to a choice. And for me, flying at that point had become, if I had a bad day, I would go fly, just because it became that sense of happiness. To be in an airplane just felt like I was going home. And oftentimes it would mean I'd end up studying until midnight, 1, 2 o'clock, because I took that couple hours to go out to the airfield. It comes down to choices. And we can make all kinds of excuses about why we're not doing something in life. But if you really look yourself in the mirror and go, what's important to me, you're going to make time for it. And that's what I did, is I ended up focusing, balancing, I guess, in some sense, but giving up those things that weren't quite as important to me to ensure that I could do those things that were important to me, like flying.
That's good advice for any age, I think.
It's hard to do.
Yes,
really hard to do sometimes.
So you when you graduated from college, you went on to be commissioned as a pilot in the Air Force. Can you tell us how that happened? Actually, we had a question from one of our viewers already, Bob. He was asking, how did you get your commission and how did it all start?
Again, a bit like picking up the phone book and calling an airline and saying, can I be a pilot? The person who taught me to fly, who had stuck with me after that first flight, had told me, why do you keep coming to me and paying me to fly when you could go into the Air Force and they'll pay you to fly? And I was like, oh, really? How do I do that? And he explained ROTC to me, a Reserve Officer Training Corps, which I think we have a few of our cadets out there in virtual land. So, hey guys, thanks for joining up and thanks for going through that process, because you will be far more prepared than I ever was. But I walked into this detachment at University of Portland, and if I admit it publicly, a bit arrogantly, said, hi, I'm here to be an Air Force pilot. And they kind of looked at me and going, okay. And why do you think you can do that? And I'm like, well, I already fly. So all I need to do is get this degree over with, and then I'm good to go. They saw me coming and had me sign right away. Obviously, it's not that easy in that you do have to perform to a certain level to be accepted into pilot training, especially when it comes to the field training. Luckily, I had been athletic all my life, which is a large part, the physical fitness, judgment, leadership, a lot of things that come from sports. You can gain them elsewhere. But I had a lot of those basic skills. So when I went to field training, I did fairly well, and that helped propel me into that pilot training slot, which I'm very thankful for.
So the first airplane that you are assigned to fly is the KC-135. So why was this the first choice for you?
Another kind of funny story. And when I went through pilot training, there was still a congressional law that said women could not fly in combat aircraft, even though for years women had been flying KC-135s and refueling combat aircraft in combat zones or at risk. So when I graduated, it was about a month before that law was actually lifted. We all knew that the law was going to be lifted, and so when they put up on the board, you get a line number basically that says this is when you get to go up and pick which airframe you'd like to fly. And we all went up, and when our time came, you looked up what was on the board and said, this is what I want to go fly. Of course, all the fighters go first typically. And then when I went up, there was a B-52. So I said, I would like to fly the B-52. And no one had expected it to be there when I said that. And so they were completely unprepared and told me to sit down. I thought, well, does that mean I get the B-52 or does that mean I'm not getting anything? And they finished the whole, they call it assignment night. And turns out at the end of it, they said, okay, you're going to the KC-135 because you can't go to B-52. And it ended up for the best. I ended up in KC-135s and really, really enjoyed the mission. And it was kind of cool when people would say, what do you do? And I'd say, I'm a gas station attendant. We're like, didn't you go to college?
A gas station attendant in the air.
Exactly.
So from that point, so you were refueling fighters in the air, and then you switched to the A-10 Thunderbolt. Now, a single seat fighter is quite different than an aerial refueling tanker. So can you explain how you made that transition?
Like everything, I guess, life is stories. They had a program. We were short on fighter pilots during that time. And so they came out with a program called Crossflow. And you had to apply for it. It was a fairly intense paperwork drill, basically, where you had to put down all of your qualifications, why you were qualified. You had to get your wing commanders, who's at this point, I was a senior lieutenant just getting ready to be a captain. And so to go to the wing commander and do an interview to tell him why I thought that I could go from KC-135s to fighters was pretty challenging. And then they gave you an endorsement and you send in your package to a board. The board evaluated all of the packages and then selected, I think it was 40 each time. So this was something that was ongoing. I made it known that I wanted to do this. At that point, I had already had my first airplane, a Yak-52, an old Russian trainer that did aerobatics. And so the wing commander was pretty confident that I could maneuver an airplane beyond just straight and level.
Mhm.
And so he gave me the endorsement. I didn't get it the first time I applied. Program came up 6 months later and I applied again and I didn't get it. Third time came around and I thought, you know, third time's a charm. I'll go ahead and do it. I mean, everybody, of course, right? You know, I always give it 3 chances. And by this time, my friends started telling me, oh, you know, what do you want to do that for? You know, flying the 135, you can go to the airlines and you don't want to go do that. And then and I was like, look, I've always wanted to do this. I'm going to give it a go. Put my package in again, and third time around, didn't get it. So fourth time, and now my friends are telling me, you know, trying to talk me out of the whole thing, which was kind of interesting. They're like, oh, you don't want to do this. They're just going to tell you no. They'll never take a girl. They haven't taken a girl yet. Don't do it. So I put in my package again the fourth time, and I don't get it. So now I'm coming up on the age group where they're like the age limit of when you can transfer. And so fifth time around, even the wing commander's like, you know, I will sign this. You will still be my number one. I still believe in you, but are you really sure you want to go do this? And I'm just like, okay, everyone is telling me don't follow my dream. And so I called up the person who took the packages in San Antonio, and I said, hey, everyone's telling me that it's a waste of time. You know, are they ever going to pick a girl? Is that really what this is about? And he says, you know, I don't know. Every board is different. So every board is made up of different people. He says, I have no idea what their decision making is, but I do know that every time I see your name come across my desk, I smile. I said, you know what? I'm going to send in that package. And that last fifth time, that I lucked out. So I learned from that even though people are telling you no or trying to soften the hurt of failure or maybe help you find an easier path that may not ultimately achieve your dream, if it's something that's truly, truly important to you, it's worth all the bumps and bruises. It truly is.
Well, thanks for sharing that story. It sure shows persistence and determination. So, and from that, it led to 3,000 hours in flight with over 50 combat flights in the A-10 in Afghanistan. So I know that I asked you earlier to share a story and you shared this video with me. So I wanted to show this video. Did you want to say anything before I showed that?
No, I think I'm going to let you just show it and then maybe I'll talk to it afterwards.
All right.
Copy, Hog 01. Night Owl, Hog 01 has the white smoke in sight. Low pass, shore force confirmed, that's the enemy. Hog 01, copies, repositioning. Understand anything in that building is a target.
Please catch a visual on your right wing passing right now. I don't have the smoke.
Copy that, cover.
I'm going to just fast forward to another run.
All Hog 01 is friendlies in sight, building in sight, south to north, run in hot. Hawk 01 is in hot.
That's clear. You're cleared hot. Go hot. Hawk 01, guns good, guns good.
Hawk 01.
So thanks, Monica, for the video. The reason I picked that video is because in Afghanistan, it was predominantly, our mission was predominantly protecting the forces on the ground. And that shows, to me, it's a good example of the coordination that's required. And we'll probably talk about that in a little more detail later, but the thing that I took away from Afghanistan, the biggest lesson learned, was that all of the things that I did leading up to the mission. So you can see how in the first part of that video, there was a lot of coordination, very hard to hear. And that radio chatter was very realistic, where you may get about 75% of what the person on the ground is telling you. And what they're describing is the location of the friendly forces, the location of the enemy, how much room you have as far as from your attack angle, and what type of ordnance that they're looking for. And then as we went forward into the actual gun run there, you see that when the pilot rolled in, there was about 2.5 to 3 seconds where you're actually pointing the weapon at the target and you have to make the decision. Is this the correct target? Am I making the right shot? Am I doing it within the rules of engagement? Is this exactly the effect that the person on the ground is looking for? And you make that decision and you make your choice. In this case, it was a good one, and guns on target as he came off. And then you're worried about, you're focused on any types of counterfire that may be coming, which is the aggressive pull-off. And so in all of that, if you go into that environment where you're expected to make life and death decisions without any of the homework that goes into it, and that means thousands of hours of study time. I think for every hour I flew in Afghanistan, there had to be at least 100 hours of preparation time. And it wasn't necessarily 100 hours and then go fly, 100 hours go fly. It was all in those years leading up to it. And until you're in it, you don't really understand that the reason why you're memorizing this fuse does this within this, millisecond of a time, you don't realize how that information will play out in those 3 seconds when you're making those life and death decisions. Thankfully, most of life is not that way, but what it did teach me is that preparation and knowledge will always pay off. Always, always. And in every mission I flew in Afghanistan where I felt like I was really prepared for it, they all went amazingly. Every once in a while when you felt rushed or you were like, yeah, I got this, and you didn't really put that little bit extra into it, something surprised us. And thank gosh for the rest of the training that you had, you were able to rely on it. But it was a stark lesson in it, even though this pass is only 3 seconds, it's a lot more than that. And things aren't as easy as they seem, especially when it comes to flying. And all of the preparation, all of the study, all of the practice, the many hours in the airplane, the many hours in the simulator, the many hours sitting in a chair pretending you're flying, chair flying, that's what it is all about. This is just basically your final test. for all of that information. And so thanks for showing the video. I think hopefully it shows the temporal distortion that pilots go through when it comes down to life or death, emergency procedures, etc. In that it may look easy because we've trained and practiced it, but it's only easy because we've trained and practiced it.
Mm-hmm. I know you made a comment to me when we were talking earlier about what result, whether it's right or wrong is not what matters, but it's really the debrief and what you learn from it is what matters. Can you speak a little bit more about that? I think it really applies in today's world as we sit and watch the news and make judgments on the 3-second video that we see of what's happening in the world. So I think maybe your insight would be beneficial.
Very good point. And I can't believe I forgot about the debrief. So thank you. Because truly, one of the things that I think makes aviation unique is that we have a system in which we debrief. Everything we do, we talk about. And it's not to say, hey, great job, great flight. 90% of that debrief is focused on those little things you may not have caught in that 3 seconds. The context around you, the system of systems. In this case, what did the JTAC, the Joint Tactical Air Controller, the guy on the ground with the radio, say to you that maybe you missed, that could have led to something that didn't have a positive effect? Or what did you catch that helped you build the context of what you were doing? And then most importantly is, even though this was a successful mission, what can you do better tomorrow? Because in the flying world and in a lot of different professions, it's not about being the best, it's about being better every day. And in doing so, we used to say excellence is a journey, it's not an end state. And the minute you think that you're there or that you've arrived, that's when something's going to bite you. And so we focused on the debrief to not only get better every time, but to remind us that every single time you go up in an airplane or every single time you do something, there is something in the environment that could bite you. And if you're not aware of what you're doing or what implications those changes in the environment can have on you, then you're adding risk to the mission. And in this case, it's not only risk to the mission, but risk to the forces on the ground. And so the debrief is the most important thing of any mission.
I think you can really apply that to other careers as well. I like the quote you said of just trying to be better every day. I think that's really profound. So just a few pictures here I wanted to share was just the fact that you were flying a single seat fighter plane, but the mission really involved a lot of other people. So I had just a couple of pictures here that tried to show some of the other people that would have been involved. And in this one here, actually one of the people that work at the museum noticed this is a Black Hawk helicopter behind there. So, and then you have a lot of people around you. So can you explain a little bit about the coordination that goes, the coordinated effort that you have to take during a mission?
Especially with the A-10, because like I said, our primary mission is supporting the ground. And the people you see in the picture here are Joint Tactical Air Controllers or Tactical Air Control Party specialists who are learning the trade of calling in airstrikes and protecting those ground forces with air assets. In the back, the helicopter, that was actually a medevac helicopter. So for injured forces, they would come on the battlefield and secure the injured force and evacuate them. The coordination that goes on, like you saw in the video, we had 45 seconds of coordination where one of these JTACs was on the ground on the radio saying, here's where the friendly are, here's where the enemy is, here's the building, everything in that building is considered fair game. Keep all fires, I think you said south of the smoke. I may be wrong, but keep all your fires in this direction from the smoke. You heard the pilot come back, instead of just going, yep, got it, they repeated it, because we know communication is two-way. And we may not always hear what the person's message was. Even if we repeat verbatim, it may not be the message that they're looking to send. And so you hear the pilot come back, repeat, understand, friendlies to the north, enemy to the south, keep all fires to the south, run in heading XY, and I'll be in 30 seconds, and you're cleared hot. That whole exchange not only included the JTAC on the ground and the pilot in the airplane, but it also included the entire force that's on the field in the ground. There's a commander there who's telling the JTAC, hey, I need this type of effect in this area for this period of time. And that person is relying on the JTAC to relay his commander's intent to the pilot, who then is also relaying to the wingmen, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. Now here's your role to make sure that I come off of this target pass safe. And then this is what I expect you to do following my pass. And so you can see in a very short period of time, there's a lot of coordination that comes into play. A couple points that I draw from it is communication, and not just going, yep, I hear you, we're good, but truly seeking to understand and ensure that the mission the person sent and that you received is truly the message that is what is supposed to be taken away. The second piece is to make sure that when you communicate that you leave the door open to being wrong. So many people are like, that's not what I told you. It's like, okay, dude, I don't know what you told me, but this is what I heard, and this is a message I received. So the onus is now on the sender to resend in a different manner instead of just yell at me louder to get the message across. And that lesson actually trickles all the way down to the youngest airman, and then all the way back up through the command center who's monitoring this flight to make sure that the assets are being used appropriately and legally. And so you can imagine it's like the most, if I can say it, the most hellacious game of telephone that you've ever seen, but we practice it. We practice it all the time. We do these big major exercises that help us live through this before we have to do it for real.
That's a great example of how systems thinking works on a mission like this. When you see just one aircraft shooting, you really realize what else is going on behind the scenes. So I wanted to share this picture. I really love this picture because it really captures the picture and the bullet points, an avenue of leadership for women in the military. So it's quite impressive what you have done in your career. And I thought that you might have some advice for other young people that are just joining the military. What would be some advice that you could give to them?
Yeah, if you have curly hair, well, I have curly hair naturally, and I used to get such grief for that hair. I do still wear curly every once in a while, but that's not my advice. I'm sorry. I remember this moment. I was actually speaking at a women's luncheon where someone asked me a question, and I told him, I said, look, I don't want to be labeled, or it was something about, being one of the first female fighter or first female whatever. And my response was, I don't want to be labeled as the first female or anything female ever, because to me, I'm just a pilot. just around the squadron calling me just Jill. Touche. But I think I was in a unique period of time where women and fighters were not that typical. Thank gosh, we have far more now, but it's still a little perplexing to me that I'll go online and see first female X, first female that, or second female this, or female that, female this, and I love it. I love that women are out doing what they're, following their dreams, doing what they set out to do. But I also think that we're not giving people full credit. I mean, I was an A-10 pilot, period. Yes, I happen to be female, but there are thousands of A-10 pilots out there who aren't female, who are equally cool. Okay, maybe even cooler. It's not about the gender. And when it came to leadership, I still experienced that. Oh, I have a female commander. And it was just very frustrating to me that was how people chose to describe someone who happened to be female who's in that type of position. I got over it though. And it's kind of funny because the guys in your previous picture, the JTACs, were the ones who got me over it. In that, because I was literally one of the few females who became Joint Tactical Air Controller, qualified instructor, evaluator. And I always felt I was still in that mindset that I had in pilot training, where I was one of only 2 women in my class, or whatever number going to fighters, the only one to get cross flow. I still had that sense of being special in my mind. And the JTACs got me over it when we worked on a gift for our group commanders going away. We did a picture book of Sun Tzu's Art of War. And there's a chapter in Sun Tzu that talks about the commander. And they drew stick figures for the pictures. And so it was a coloring book of Sun Tzu, basically. And in this book, when I got all the pages back, because everybody took a couple pages out of each section and drew and signed their names to it, in the commanders section, every single picture was a woman. And not one of them said anything about it being a woman. And it was at that point that I realized that a lot of what I was viewing was my own perception. It wasn't really the world looking at me. And that I was feeding that perception by being this, qualifying myself as the first, second, third, fourth, pick a number, female to do X, Y, or Z. So for women coming up now, you're special. I mean, every single person who seeks a leadership position is special in my book, because leadership's about responsibility, and that takes a rare person who will stand up and say, I am willing to be responsible for those around me. I am willing to carry that burden, because it is a burden, trust me. After a few years as being a commander or being in any leadership position, it gets tiring, because you have to put their needs and what the organization needs to be successful first. And if there's anything left over, then you can give a little bit to yourself to keep you going, keep you fueled, so that you can keep giving to them. But that's what's special. It's not about whether you're female, male, that doesn't matter. What matters about leadership is your willingness to accept responsibility and your willingness to do all of the work that goes into being a good leader. Listening with an open mind, being willing to admit that you're wrong, being willing to listen to contrarian viewpoints and go, yes, those are all valid, but I can't explain to you right now why, but we're going to go in this direction. And I know it's not the direction you think we should be going. My risk to accept, I need you to support me, now go that direction. and we're going to debrief it later, I promise you, but for now, just go. That takes a special talent, and it takes a certain amount of self-confidence, but it also takes a huge amount of humility, which of course fighter pilots aren't really known for. I keep working on that aspect of it. But for those who are coming up wanting to be leaders, start studying now. Start thinking about what it truly means to be a leader. It's not about you. A lot of people go into leadership thinking, yep, I'm out front, it's all about me. If that's what you think, you're not leading. You're just the person out front. When you start thinking about it's all about them, it's all about the organization, it's all about making them and the mission successful, that's true leadership in my book.
I think that's definitely a sign of leadership in anyone's book. But I wanted to go back to your aerobatic flying. So when you were describing your packages that you filled out in order to fly the A-10, you said that because you had flown the single seat, you had your own plane that was single seat already, that you were able to fly. That kind of gave confidence to the people that were selecting you or are endorsing you. So I just wanted you to talk about a little bit about your own business that you started called Ragged Edge.
The picture up in the left-hand corner is actually Ralph. He's the old guy who got out of the airplane and scared the bejesus out of me when I was standing in the hangar. I was actually deployed to Afghanistan. I had always talked about wanting to be an air show pilot because Ralph flew in the air shows. He actually worked with Patty Wagstaff, who most people will recognize as a very gifted aviator and an air show legend in herself. And he was her safety pilot. And I always told him, I'm going to fly air shows someday. And he's like, yes, yes, yes. And we had started flying competition when I deployed for the first time in the A-10. And I was overseas when I got an email from him, typical Ralph style, going, hey, if you're going to fly air shows, you need to think about doing it sooner rather than later because I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's and I really want to see you do it. Like, okay. I came home from that deployment and I said, well, I haven't really, made a name for myself in the competition realm. And he's like, look, you've been to combat, you've been shot at, you came home, that's good enough. Let's get to the air shows. And so we worked together, developed my first air show sequence, and ended up, he was at my first show where it was in North Carolina, up on one of the bluffs. And for the life of me, I can't think of the name of the town, but it's this airfield that's up on a bluff. And it has a large berm on one side of the runway, which generates a lot of crosswind turbulence. And the crosswinds were out of my limits. And it was just a very gusty day, and I kept moving backwards and backwards and backwards in the lineup, in hoping the winds would come down. But I kept telling the announcer and the air boss, I said, look, winds are out of limits, I can't fly. My very first air show. And I'm like, yeah, can't fly. A lot of the other participants were giving me grief. Oh, you're the girl, can't fly, I'm gonna go fly. And I'd be like, okay, what are your crosswind limits? How do you approach this? Oh, if I feel good, I'm going to fly. Okay, that's highly unprofessional in my book, but okay, And Ralph kind of stood there and watched this for maybe an hour or so, and I started getting a little worried, like maybe I was being too conservative or I wasn't quite understanding the way the air show world worked. And he looked at me and he says, you know what? 20 years from now, you're going to be standing on this tarmac, still flying air shows. And he said, I can't put money on anybody else here that will be doing that. And he said, set your limits, stick to your limits, fly your limits. And if it's out of your limits, keep your butt on the ground. And that's stuck with me ever since, because every single show that I've ever flown, we review the limits, we review the sequence, we review the outs if something goes wrong. And knock wood, I'm still here. And hopefully still flying another show.
I'm glad you shared that story about your mentor. We actually had someone from the audience that asked about your connection with your mentor and how long you kept in touch with them. But I think your story kind of tells the answer to that.
If you don't mind, he was 70, I think 74 years old when we took our last flight together. And at that point, the Parkinson's, he was having a hard time moving sometimes. But when he got in the airplane, it all went away. We got in the airplane, went up and flew, and he's like, okay, I have the airplane. And he put it through its paces, and I was still in awe. I was just like, this is incredible. We landed, and what I didn't tell you in the first story of our first flight, I had no clue how much flying cost at that point, and I only had $20 in my pocket as that kid who went out to the airport. And after we flew, again, being the awesome future fighter pilot that I was, I burst into tears. And I had pulled the $20 out of my pocket, and I went into this, I know I don't have enough money to pay you, and I really know that this isn't going to be enough, but I don't want you to be mad because you didn't tell me how much it was going to cost, and I didn't know how much it cost, and if I had known how much this was going to cost, or that I was even going to fly today, I surely would have brought more money, but I don't have any more money, but I have a job so I can make money, but all I have is $20, so please take my $20, but for the love of God, you've got to let me fly again. And he just looked at me and he's like, okay. Took the money, folded it up, put it in his pocket, and said, kids, you keep bringing me these, we'll keep flying. Fast forward 30 plus years later, we took our last flight. I gave him my $20 because every time I flew after that, I gave him $20. And he says, you know what, kid? You are the best investment I ever made.
The importance of a great mentor.
Yes, and they find you in the most amazing places.
Thanks for sharing that story with us. I want to go ahead and show this picture. We actually had a member of the audience ask, how did you get your call sign Raggz?
Well, every fighter pilot gets a naming, and for me, there were like 20 different names that they were throwing out there, but the one that stuck was Raggedy Ann. Because with the curly kind of reddish hair, they were like, oh, Raggedy Ann. And they're like, we can't name a fighter pilot Raggedy Ann. And then it went to a bunch of different other names that they thought would be cool. And then it came back to Raggedy Ann. And they kept going, no, we can't call a fighter pilot Raggedy Ann. And then somebody said, hey, I know, she did really well on the strafe rags last time around. She even beat out the old cranium weapons officer who completely went ballistic, stormed out of the room because he was one of those that was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not putting up with this crap. She didn't beat me, and stormed out of the room. And then they're all like, yes, Raggz, that's it. It took them another 45 minutes to figure out that they wanted it to be Raggz, but yeah. So a little bit of Raggedy Ann, but I think really what cinched it was the strafe rags.
Awesome. All right, I want to show everybody something from the air show. So next we'll go and watch a video from the show.
Lady, and she is taking to the sky, lady. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Ragged Edge. She's living proof that dreams do come true. At an air show just like this one, she watched the performers soaring through the sky and said, someday that will be me. She's been flying since she was 16 years old. She's flown anything she can get her hands on. From her first airplane, a little underpowered tailor-craft high-wing two-seat airplane, to her favorite military jet, the mighty A-10 Warthog. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the smoke is on from 3,000 feet. Let's watch Jill Long as she dives toward the ground, rolling the airplane in aileron rolls, throwing the stick to the left. With 2 complete aileron rolls, now going for 3 as he loses altitude, gains airspeed, and at show center, watch her as she pulls up into the vertical. Look at beautiful blue sky here as she goes up over the top and a beautiful loop with a snap roll on top. That's called a high-speed stall. And down the backside, it's called the avalanche. Jill Raggz Long. The fight.
All right, so I always find that inspiring video.
I tell you, everyone should have a Rob Ryder who announces for them as they go through life. Here she comes, Jill Raggz Long. You could do anything. There she goes. She's sitting down and having coffee. It's amazing. I love it though. He is a wonderful man, and flying air shows was a wonderful gift. Being able to share that passion with kids. That, if you don't mind, I have a quick air show story. I flew the Andrews Air Show several times. The first time I met a young man who, I think he was 7 or 8 years old at that point, so there was a lot of connection right there. And he says, "Oh, Raggz, I'm going to be a pilot someday." And his dad looked at him and said, "Hey, son, you're terrible at math." And I was like, "Oh, so was I." And his eyes lit up, and I said, "You know what, though? I got better. I worked really, really hard at it, and I got better. I'm still not great. Don't do math in public unless it has a dollar sign, and then I'm all over it. But I said, just work hard at it. If you really want it, you can do this." Next year, he shows up, and he's like, Raggz, I got a B in math. I'm going to be a pilot." Next year, I show up, and he's now like 12 inches taller than what he was before. I didn't even recognize him. And he's standing there all cool. Yeah. And I'm just like, "Hey." And my husband looked at me, and he's like, "You don't know who this is, do you?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Well, let me put it this way, Raggz. I have an A in math, and I'm going to the United States Air Force Academy."
Wow, that's awesome.
Turns out he actually is at the United States Air Force Academy now. And it was just a matter that, I was nobody. I just was somebody who happened to get out of an airplane that he saw fly, who told him he could do it just like the person when I was a kid. And that is such a special gift. And I have never fully understood it, but I appreciate the fact that just being able to reach out and tell people it's okay to dream and work hard at it. It may work out, it may not, but it doesn't hurt. And if you don't try, the answer is no. So what does it hurt to try? At least you'll learn something in the experience, and it'll lead to the next dream or the next dream or the dream after that. And so I love air shows. It breaks my heart that the world is not able to go to an air show right now. Hopefully someday soon, as they say in Germany, drücken die Daumen, instead of cross the fingers, press the thumbs. I hope someday soon that we can get back to dreaming big like that and watching those who are living their dream and sharing in that. It's a really kind of sad place.
Yeah.
But thankfully for people like you and your team at Pearl Harbor Museum, that we're able to still connect.
Yeah, and actually there's a person in the audience right now that's looking for a little advice. They are 24 years old, and they've just graduated from college, and they're wondering if it's too late to pursue a career like yours, like a Air Force pilot.
Absolutely not. I think it's 27 and a half still is the age limit for entering pilot training. So you've already graduated college. Yay, good job. That's not an easy feat. So my advice is go online and look at the requirements for officer training school and find out what they're looking for, because that would be your quickest way. The other aspect is Guard and Reserve units in your state or in other states, depending on what platform you're interested in flying, are always looking for talented people interested in flying. And so even if you hit that age limit, guess what? There's waivers. There's always a waiver. So it's a much harder thing to go do if you have to get a waiver, but it's still feasible. And there is a hard cutoff line somewhere. I apologize, I'm not prepared with the age group, but I would recommend that. Officer training school, which would take you on the active duty track, and then Guard or Reserve, which gives you active duty for a period of time, and then now they call it part-time, which is not a bad deal. In fact, that's a nice way to balance a civilian career with an active, pseudo-active duty career.
All right, good advice for those that still want to be a part of that. We have some other members of the audience that also served in Afghanistan or had people serve as well. So some of the questions, one person was asking whether you were in Kunar, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, in 2012, and because that person had an A-10 do a run for them. Is that same time frame that you would have been over there?
It is. There were actually, so again, we go back to the gender thing, but there were actually three female A-10 pilots at that time. So it could have been any one of us if you happened to hear a female voice on it. But yes, we were there, and that honestly, I think, was a pretty tough time to be down in that area. It was challenging, and if you were on the ground, I say thank you, because you made our mission look easy, because what you guys, the folks on the ground, were doing was pretty darn impressive.
That one was from Angel. And then another question was from Gregory. He was asking what other women aviators inspire you, and did you happen to know Lieutenant Colonel Shauna Kimbrell, the first African-American fighter pilot in the Air Force?
Yes, I do know Shauna. In fact, we were at Aviano together in Italy, and amazing woman, much better pilot than I am. Don't tell her I said that. Honestly, every female pilot I've ever met has inspired me, because they all have an interesting story, an interesting path. And those, I'll say, let me rephrase that to everyone who is willing to share their stories. Some aren't, which I find a little sad, because there's still a little bit of, I don't want to be seen as, just one of the gals. I want to be more seen as one of the guys. But in particular, Patty Wagstaff, of course, has been a huge mentor of mine. She's, especially when it came to the air show world, and Debbie Gary, Debbie Wren Harvey, all three of them have offered great advice. Jackie Warda, who also another talented air show pilot, have all opened up their hearts and experiences to me and helped me learn to be a better pilot. Of course, probably I'll forever be in his debt is Ralph, and Ralph introduced me to a number of WASP, which you saw Fifanella on the airplane, which thankfully I was given permission to put her on the Ragged Edge. But the women Air Force service pilot of World War II, amazing group of ladies, and each of them in their own right were what we call sheroes. And although their experience was very, very different from mine and those that walked the path with me and those that follow us, they truly were the trailblazers. for the United States Air Force and for the women pilots of the United States Air Force. And for them, I'll forever be grateful and miss them all dearly. Just beloved people.
Mm. Yeah, that's definitely the importance of mentors and also finding that group that supports you in following your dream. So we're so glad to have met you through this program. And I know that you support the EAA Young Eagles program. Can you tell us a little bit about that so people could know possibly another avenue for flying?
Absolutely. So EAA Young Eagles is a wonderful program where pilots, all walks, makes, models of pilots will offer up flight hours to our young eagles. And if you go on the EAA website, there's actually a Young Eagles program there. They'll talk about it, and they'll sign up for a day where they just offer rides. And you can be that person who walks into Hangar. Please don't burst into tears. That may not work for everybody, but walk into the Hangar and just be like, hey, I'm here to fly. And who knows, maybe that'll be the thing that lights a fire within your soul that says, this is going to be worth it. Every day worrying about whether or not I'm going to bounce the next landing or get shot at or even come home that night, that may be the thing that lights your soul on fire and makes you want to be a pilot. Or it just may be a really rad experience.
Oh, now that's great to hear about that. I want to just show everybody our website just so that they can see where they could find links like that. So we shared links to other places that support aviation or any other kind of career pathway with aviation. So just going to briefly show people that. Sorry. So on our website, this is the homepage of our website right now. If we go to the education tab here, and then you can see Discover Your Future in Aviation here, then you can click on that, and there's a lot of resources such as links to the EAA. So if you're interested in the Young Eagles program, you can find information like that or any information about career pathways. Another thing I wanted to let people know about is scholarships. So we have just started our scholarship season, and we have scholarships that you can start applying for starting in November. So we have several scholarships that are now open to aspiring pilots. So hopefully people can take advantage of some of those things. I want to ask now Ashley, our educator, to share a resource, another for any aspiring pilot. She's created an education resource for you. Ashley,
hello everyone. All right, so I'm going to share with you guys a few resources that we pulled together for our younger viewers, mainly targeting K through 12. I'm going to share my screen really quick here, what we come together with. And here we go. We start with some coloring pages for our younger viewers of Raggz aircraft, former aircraft. And then we'll move through some fun learning activities. All of these have a theme of aviation careers. But what I really want to highlight is the research activities that we have for the older kids. And we're going to get to our booklet for our high school students. Now, we know that it's really hard to start creating ideas and finding ideas for deciding on any kind of career path, but especially in the gigantic world of aviation, it is hard to navigate, and you might need some help focusing your ideas. And a lot of times we don't know what questions to ask or who to ask or even what to ask ourselves. So we've put together something to help focus yourself and make it easy to refer back to after you've collected all of your information, and you can refer to it as you collect more as you go. It's meant to work with our website that Monica just showed you. We have a giant library of resources available to you that includes scholarships, as she said, even activities and practices that you can do and simulators. And you can log all of that information that you find right here and make sure that you get to the very end where you start putting it together. Pick the career path that you're most interested in and write a little bit about it. Why does it suit you? Why do you think you would like to do that? And I believe that Colonel Raggz made sure that you understood where you should start thinking in your head and how to start answering these questions for yourself. So these resources are available to you on our website. We'll make sure to post them. And if you have any questions, make sure that you email us and we'll be happy to help you with that. All right.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Ashley. That's a great resource for any aspiring pilot or anybody that's just interested in aviation in another aspect. So thank you. So Colonel Long, thank you for spending so much time with us. It's getting late there in Germany, and we appreciate all of the time you spent in our hangar talk with us here today. So you have shared great wisdom with us and how to handle some critical situations and insight on how to navigate one's career or even start if interest in flying. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for letting me spend just a little bit of time in Hawaii.
Hopefully everyone's still
I feel more tan already.
Hopefully everyone is enjoying the beach and at least virtually for today.
It was beautiful.
Thank you. And thanks to our viewers.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who dialed in. I appreciate the fact that you spent a little bit of time with me. I know that time is precious, and the fact you were willing to share that with me really means a lot. So thank you.
And the same from us. So from Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, we also thank the viewers that spent an hour, a little bit over an hour with us today. Please check back in for the educational resources. You can find those on the website later, and we'll also make a video recording of this. And so probably in a later today or tomorrow, you'll find a YouTube video recording of this webinar. So. And lastly, I just have to ask for any donations that you might, if you think that you enjoy these programs or programs like these, please consider donating to the museum, and you can learn how to do that just by going to our website. So thanks again for being here with us today. And on behalf of Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, we say aloha and mahalo.